Mega Man X7 is something new, something unique even. It's a game that nobody likes. Just kidding. It's the first and last 3D X game, done by the same developers as X5, X6, and the Game Boy Color games. But is it really that bad? No. Let's get on with it already. X7 makes a bold move, a jump to 3D. While some stages such as Radio Tower are similar to say Kirby 64 in how they're structured, being 2.5D stages with unique camera angles, others such as Air Force or Cyberfield are completely three-dimensional. I found this to be interesting and refreshing for the series' first attempt at it. And there was definitely an attempt to make the gameplay closer to the ones preceding it. Down to even some silly details like how chaining dash jumps works or how some weapons behave. They didn't just throw out the basics of the previous games. Instead, they tried to translate them to 3D. One of the things completely different from the previous games, however, is the addition of auto-aim. Now you can switch between different targets, and as long as you're close enough to one, you no longer have to say jump to hit it. However, the game is designed around this, as many of the enemies are on the move, appear in clusters, or use shields. You can't just smash through the game if you don't want to take damage, so you still have to be careful in planning. Enemies such as Baton Bones in particular stand out. They usually exist on 3D planes, even in 2.5D stages, meaning that hitting them isn't an easy task. But they can hit you quite easily as they travel quickly. I found this fun in stages like Radio Tower and Crimson Palace, as they both show how, even with aiming, a 2.5D stage can work well, as it's just as easy to try to snipe enemies or laser obstacles as it is to get hit. Similarly, mostly 3D focused stages like the second half of Lava Factory or the entirety of Air Force also do well, as dealing with enemies in 3D requires you to be careful. And both stages feature quite a few fun set pieces such as the bird mid-boss in Air Force and the inside section's enemy clusters or the serpents and pipes in Lava Factory, all of which require you to understand how to navigate the environment and deal with enemies. This game's controls are a mixed bag. On one hand, I really do appreciate how close the animations feel to the predecessors, and overall, while not perfect, they don't hinder the experience. If you have the parts you can rescue from Reploids. If you don't, the game's controls will be rather bad. Actually, they'll be absolutely terrible. Without shock buffer, almost every time you get hit will be like you got heavy damage, forcing you into a long knockback animation, and without hyperdash, you'll move around slower than classic Mega Man on the Game Boy. I love the part system of the previous games, I really do, and I can appreciate what they tried to do here, but at this point, they're taking away basic parts of the moveset and turning them into parts. That's a horrible way to do it. If anything, some of the parts should have been given by default, while the other parts should have been more similar to how X6 did it. One thing I do love about the game's controls, however, is Axel. While most dismiss him as an inferior X in this game, I found him to be the best character to play as. His rolling move allows you to dodge some of the harder attacks, similarly to Solar Razor's Hyperdash, with a similar risk factor afterwards. His hover is done by holding the jump button, which is not just far more intuitive than the previous hovers, as double tap inputs are a sin, but it also lasts longer, encouraging its usage more. He has completely unique fire modes compared to X's charge attacks, and those cost no ammo to use. They're hit and miss, but some like Explosion make X's equivalent pale in comparison. His copy ability isn't very useful for combat, but it's used for some of the more interesting rescues in the game, and playing as him is just fun. Sure, X might have the charge shot, but he's definitely worse in terms of mobility, and his armor doesn't do a good job at solving that. Actually, aside from some charged weapons and a cool design, the glide armor isn't very useful in general, and for some reason you can't even get his capsules with anyone other than X himself in this game. Why in the hell? Also, you're locked out of using X for a while, until you either rescue 64 Reploids, or beat the 8 stages. This sort of makes sense, since X is very powerful in pure damage output, but the way you unlock X is questionable because of the whole capsules problem. Why not just allow getting capsules as any character, anytime? The dual character system was brought back from Solar Racer, which works well here too and allows you to experiment more with how you handle each stage and boss. The ranking system behaves similarly to X5's, except instead of punishing you for killing more enemies, it rewards you for doing that, and overall, it's way less punishing, especially in terms of time. Is it perhaps too forgiving? Probably. It's really easy to get the Ultimate Hunter by just focusing on one character and no damaging stages quickly. But it works and I can appreciate that. This game also adds a New Game Plus, which is a great addition and slightly helps to alleviate the problems associated with parts and X, along with encouraging replayability. And that's not mentioning how good this game's aesthetics are. Well, I can see the argument about it being budgeted for its time. I think compared to its 3D platformer contemporaries, such as Super Mario Sunshine or Sonic Heroes, it has a far stronger art direction. The stages have a great color palette and are detailed environments with a lot of animated elements and sections, and most of the character models look pretty good. Each boss introduction even has unique camera angles, which makes the scenes more memorable. However, is it weird that the characters seem to have just one face no matter what? I can understand lacking full-on 3D facial animation, but couldn't they have just made multiple textures and done it that way? A common problem with X7 though are the many regressions, for example, the menus. After X4 and X5 both had relatively slow menus, X6's weapon and stage clear menus were incredibly quick and snappy, along with just looking better overall. So you'd think that would carry over into X7, right? Nope. It's even worse than in X5 now, as Alien interrupts you the moment you try to do, well, almost anything. And the entire menu is covered in orange for some reason. The little 2D Alien in the upper corner is a cute touch though. The rescues return from X6, and they aren't so bad. They have completely unique designs per level, just like X6. Their placements in stages such as Lava Factory or Deep Forest are clever, and they're spread out decently well. Except for just one little detail. They die from anything. Be it an obstacle or an enemy's animation, anything that dares to even slightly touch them means death. It's not like it's particularly hard to get them all, it's just really annoying when in X6 only one enemy could kill a rescue, and the game was balanced around that. Also, while most of the other items in the game aren't special in their placements, there's one that really bothers me. Who the hell thought that Air Force Hard Tank was a good idea? The item collisions seem slightly off in this game, but it's usually not a problem since you don't have to do it in, you know, midair. Seems a bit tricky for what is just one of the many hard tanks you can get, don't you think? And finally, the last in our list of complaints list is poor old Zero. In X6, he was some of the most fun characters you'll ever get to control in a video game. In X7, he's the worst of the three. It's not like his animations are particularly the problem. They take too long, yes, but they do feel satisfying. But for whatever reason, he has an extremely long base combo. His air slash is horrendous, and his damage output isn't enough. His techniques are actually pretty decent, being more experimental and interesting to use, but that's not enough to make him stand out. Maybe I'm missing something. I really hope I do, but from my experience with this game so far, Zero is too weak to be useful. It saddens me to see him go from one of the most fluid to a gimmicky mess. However, there is a place in this game where the mechanics and designs get to shine, the boss battles. When playing 3D platformers, I felt that one of the common flaws they shared were their bosses. At best, they were serviceable. it was extremely rare to see a fight go above that. X7, however, deserves respect for doing just that. Most of the bosses are really fun to fight and put up a good challenge. The game takes its core design principles, and they're at their best here. Boss attacks usually cover quite some ground, and the bosses themselves usually are constantly on the move, so you can't just panic or stand in place. However, even with parts, your aiming system usually won't reach the boss from far away. So either you have to aim manually at the risk of the boss simply dodging the attack, or you have to dance around with the boss and be close. This game has a ton of examples of great fights. Even a fully 2D one, such as Krorang, is fun to deal with and revisits old concepts in order to improve them, ironing out attacks and encouraging you to use character-specific moves such as Axel's roll for dodging. A fight like Red behaves similarly to Gate, but is less demanding for a beginner player. Warfly and Gungaroo show just how well a 3D fight can fare. Both you and the boss deal blows constantly and keep each other on your toes. There are only two bad fights. Stone Kong is a very basic 2D fight that fails at showing this game's strengths, and Hyanard is just a badly designed battle, no matter how you slice it. What surprised me the most when we were playing this game, however, is just how fun the Sigma fights are. Both of them are flashy, with expressive attacks and voice acting, and neither of them cross into too easy or too hard. Each attack can be learned, but you can't just dodge them without caring. I actually had fun with the Sigma fight. That's cool! But if we talk about Sigma, we should also talk about his role in the story. Wasn't he no longer a threat in X6? Well, aside from the bad translation and even worse voice acting, I think X7 has a decent story. The relationship between Axel, the Red Alert, and Zero, while not perfect, is done decently well. Cutscenes focused on character interactions are frequent, and a certain moment related to Red is even a bit touching. Hell, Red is unique in that, unlike most of the villains in the series, he's not even really a villain, nor is he possessed. Why can't we have interesting characters like this more often? But when talking about X7's story, you can't avoid talking about a certain issue. X7 has completely gotten rid of X and Sigma's character development seen in X5 and X6, as they're both rolled back to how they were at the beginning of X5. The story doesn't focus on either of them too much, so when treated as a standalone, it's not particularly bad. But this game isn't just some spin-off existing in a vacuum. It attempts to directly follow up on what came before. X6's ending is arguably the only time we see a happy ending in the X series. You can't just type skip through that while screwing up both X and Sigma. And speaking of endings, come on now. I get the whole Axel still needs to prove himself to X was meant to be a sequel hook before XA decided to retcon the hell out of absolutely everything, but this is the worst way to do it. No matter how well certain scenes such as the opening, Axel's conversation with Hyanard, or the confrontation with Red are executed, it's not good to ignore and outright retcon the developments of past games just in favor of your own new story, even if that story is interesting in its own right. There's some things I didn't talk about much, like Central Circuit, which usually gets a lot of hate, but personally, it's about as inoffensive as a Ride Chaser stage could get, and I neither hate it nor love it. The game's soundtrack, while great, it's not as good as X5 or X6 is. Despite having way more people composing it, it's less varied and sometimes doesn't fit the environments as well. The cutscene graphics do a surprisingly good job at matching the art style of the previous games, even down to the facial animations that you don't see in the in-engine ones. And Sigma being thrown out the window is probably the funniest thing in the entire series, along with anything Dynamo has said. My conclusion is that I really don't hate X7, and it grew on me after a while. However, unlike Solar Racer or X6, I can't just say this is a great game. It is inherently flawed, which is understandable due to how ambitious it is. But because of that, I can also understand why some would hate it. Personally, I enjoyed it and wish it wasn't just abandoned right after release. Its flaws could have been ironed out, and the strengths could have shined better than ever. But alas. That said, if you enjoyed the X series, I recommend giving this game a try. And who knows, maybe you'll enjoy it. Maybe you won't. Either way, I'll be glad to read what you think or any questions you have about the game in the comments. However, no matter what you do not play the US version. While in some of the other games, the localizations fail horribly in story-related areas, which some people don't even care about, this one goes even further than that, as the US version completely changes the damage table of the game, meaning everything takes around twice longer to kill in the North American version. To say that this was a horrible decision would be an understatement. Well, the European version has the original damage tables. Oh, it also cuts out the audio settings, meaning you have to endure the glorious localized voice acting. However, in a bizarre twist, the X Legacy Collection version can be argued to be the best one, as it's rendered at a higher resolution and has way faster loading times. Recommend you give Capcom your money? No. Have fun!